You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. Hello and welcome, or welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. One of the cornerstones of what we do at Yoga Medicine is the therapeutic one-to-one yoga session, a practice that is custom built to meet an individual's unique situation and circumstance. But for many of us, that's not our experience of yoga practice. And even if we've trained as a yoga teacher, we often haven't participated in a therapeutic one-to-one yoga session before being asked to teach one. That was certainly the case for me, which is why I'm so excited to welcome back returning guest Dana Diament to share her tips for teaching one-to-one. You'll remember that Dana is a yoga studio owner, a yoga medicine therapeutic specialist, one of the founding teachers of Yoga Medicine Online, and the lead teacher in our 200-hour teacher training. Dana has helped hundreds of people become yoga teachers and has personally mentored over 100 new yoga teachers to feel more confident and competent in their roles. So let's hear Dana's tips for teaching yoga one-to-one. Hi, Dana. Welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thanks again for taking time for us today.
Great to be back, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Yippee! We're talking today about, I'm sorry, that was a little bit of overexcitement there for the viewers. Just prepare yourself. We're going to have fun with this one. We're talking about teaching yoga one-on-one. And I thought a fun kickoff point would be, how did you get started? What was your first experience of teaching students individually?
It was actually quite daunting, to be honest.
Yeah.
I actually thought there was some kind of like secret club that, the
only the cool kids were in.
Yeah, only the cool kids, the special, like fanciest, most smooth yoga teachers got to teach privates. They somehow just knew the people that had the money that could afford privates. And I just had no idea how I was ever going to, break into this club of private yoga teaching. I just didn't really do it for quite a few years until I started studying with yoga medicine. So I was a little bit, I think, not the norm. I think many people already teach privates and then come to study with yoga medicine for depth of knowledge and more skills. And I was a bit the opposite. And then once I sort of had the skills where I felt like I could actually show up and be effective and felt like I knew what I was doing for my case studies for my 500-hour with yoga medicine, that was really when I started teaching privates consistently. Like prior to that, I would do kind of one-offs or things if people asked me, but I never actually went out to try to find clients. And then I had to do it. I was sort of forced into it because I wanted to get my certification and I wanted to do the case studies. So I ended up just posting on Facebook saying I'm looking for people with low back pain, and that was all I needed to do. And then there was plenty of people that wanted to work with me. So,
especially on that topic, I mean, you pick low back pain, and there's a group of people who are like, "Please help me. I've tried a bunch of things. Please help me resolve my low back pain." Did you have any idea of what people did in those sessions, or did that feel kind of secret and mysterious as well before you started teaching individually?
No, I just assumed that they were teaching, vinyasa yoga class because I was trained in vinyasa yoga, power yoga specifically. I just figured it was people who wanted just
A class.
To have the teacher all to themselves a class tailored to them, do the things they liked to do and that felt good, or maybe they were working on some fancy poses and they wanted one-on-one instruction on that, or they just didn't want to come to the yoga studio. They wanted someone to come to them. So that's what I thought privates were until I discovered the world of therapeutic yoga. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're describing my least favorite one-on-one yoga experiences where the student wants a group class flow and sequence, but they want it just for one person. I hate teaching those. And I don't do it anymore, but I definitely did do that back in the day where I said yes to everything. And to me, it's like the worst of both worlds in the sense that I've got to show up with a sequence that I've prepared without consulting the person that I'm teaching it to, and then
Yeah.
kind of on the fly figure out how I can modify it to meet their needs. And there's none of the communal group experience that you have in a class. So yeah, I was more the opposite of your scenario where I was teaching groups and was referred somebody to work with one-on-one, arrived there and realized I had no skills and nothing in my toolkit to work with this person who couldn't get down to the floor or stand back up again, was not going to be able to follow along with my power vinyasa sequence, and realized that I desperately needed more training to help me help this person.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think either way, it can be a slightly terrifying experience, a different kind of terrifying to showing up to teach a group class when you're new, a unique terror all of its own of being in a room with a human being, just the two of you, and hopefully being able to pull something out of your toolkit that's useful.
Yeah. Yeah. So all eyes are on you.
Yeah.
The one other pair of eyes just waiting. Yeah. And there's something I think about group class where, for the most part, people are pretty happy with what's presented. If they're coming to your class and they know you, obviously they have to get past that initial period of getting to know you. But once they become your regulars, or they know what they're going to get, they know they're going to be happy. Whereas when you start teaching one-on-ones, in that case that you're describing, in that scenario that you're describing, you're like, are they going to like it? And then
Yeah, it's
that's
like a
all it's
job
based
interview.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
And
a
that's all it's
long,
based on, is
long,
them
painful
liking
job
it.
interview. Exactly. Do they like me? Do they do they trust me? Do I have anything useful to offer them? Are we kind of speaking the same language? Yeah, it's like a job interview or a date that
Yeah.
one party is paying for. So there's definitely some potential for stress there. And I think we've both obviously come to really enjoy and treasure working with people one-on-one. But I think if you're a newer yoga teacher out there and you're thinking that it's just this magical secret club that everybody else is in and found it really easy, and you're the only person who finds it daunting, rest assured, there are plenty of potential avenues for stress starting teaching one-on-one. So I guess the next step is to start talking about our tips. What have you learned along the way that makes the process easier and more enjoyable for you now?
So I just love having a brief. It's probably all my years of being a designer, but I love that there's a problem that I get to solve, and that it's
Yes.
quite specific, So that's the number one tip, is that one-on-ones become more effective, more enjoyable when there's a goal that's easy to describe and to be on the same page about, you and the student, the teacher and the student. And so that's, I think, number one, is getting really clear on what we're doing and making that really specific, and outlining, sort of how we might get there. And then, even if you don't know the answers the first time, you get to walk away and do the research and look into it, and ask other people if you're unsure, go back to your training manuals and all that. So I think
Yes.
having that really defined purpose to what the one-on-one is about, and then knowing, I think, having buy-in from the other person that this isn't just a one-off session. That helped me tremendously. When I first started, I made sure that people committed to 8 sessions. And so that just saved the, like, are you going to come back? I don't know. Like, well, did I do a good job kind of thing? And it was like, well, we're not even going to get started unless we're both in it for the same reasons. So I
Hmm.
think that was something that I particularly gave me a lot of reassurance and confidence in that first session, and just making the expectations really clear as to how the sessions would unfold.
Yes, I think there's a lot of really good gems in there that I want to pull out in a little bit more detail. Firstly, even now, I put on my website that there's a minimum of 2 sessions because maybe this person is really functional and they just want advice on one specific topic. So, one session to kind of get to know them, to dig a little bit deeper, to figure out what might be helpful, and a second session to kind of put that into effect. To me, that's the sort of minimum effective dose for working with somebody one to one. And if it's something more nebulous, more long term, like low back pain, that could be structural, it could be emotional, it could be muscular, it could be
Hmm.
postural. Committing to a longer series of sessions is probably a really good idea to give both of you time to investigate fully. So yes, yes, yes to multiple sessions. And then being really clear on the goal. I wanted to ask you, do you find that out from them beforehand? Or is that something that you're willing to show up on the day and say, okay, why am I here today? What are we working on? What are we looking at?
I like to have some idea, usually either whether they're a phone call, a text, an email,
Hmm.
just some idea of what it is, because I just want to make sure that I'm able to help them. I don't want to waste anyone's time. So if it's
Yes.
something that I feel very much like that's not in my wheelhouse,
Hmm.
I just want to let them know that straight away. And yeah, if it's something that I'm unfamiliar with as well, but I feel like I could help, then, a little bit of research, I might go, oh, yeah, that's really similar to this other thing that I've,
Yes.
experienced with another client or that I've learned about or studied about. So I think it's really helpful. I don't like to show up blind, I like to show
Me
up
neither.
prepared to
No,
some
I
degree.
I love that. I totally agree because you highlighted in your first kind of range of suggestions, the underlying fear is, what if I don't have anything? What if I have no idea how to help? I mean, that's the fear, that you're in a room with somebody for an hour and you have no idea where even to start working. That's the big fear that I think holds a lot of potential one-on-one teachers back. So even if they've said to you, it's low back pain, or I need some help with my sleep, or I've got this niggling shoulder injury that keeps coming up in group classes. You don't have to have all the details, but just having a sort of a general area of focus can be so helpful to get your head into the right space, so that you have kind of poses or practices in the back of your mind, or you have some assessment tools that you might use to have a
Yeah,
look at their range of motion or their strength, just to give you a little bit of a framework, even if it doesn't turn out to be exactly that thing. Going with some ideas and then being willing to say, great, I think this has been a really good start, let me go away and do more detailed research and come back, just makes the whole process feel more competent, doesn't it?
definitely. And I was going to mention too on the assessment tools, at least through our training, you learn slightly different ones depending on what joint you're looking at. So the shoulder one has more complex assessment tools, in my opinion, whereas the hip is more straightforward, and the spine. So it's nice to have that fresh in your mind. Like for me,
Hmm.
I did when I first started, it was like I somehow ended up with all these low back pain. And then a friend came and said, oh, can you look at my shoulder? And I was like, oh, what do I do for the shoulder again?
Yeah,
And just to have that
probably.
fresh,
Let me check.
just to feel like you're going in there ready and professional. I think it gives you
Yes.
a sense of professionalism, which goes a long way as a therapeutic yoga one on one teacher.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked about this initial session. We've already suggested that it's a little bit different to a group class for one person, because it is, in my experience, totally different. We spend a bunch of time talking, sometimes up to two-thirds or three-quarters of the time
Mhm.
talking, and then some of these assessment tools that we've alluded to. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what the first session tends to look like when you've been through some yoga medicine training, or you have another therapeutic modality behind you, like physical therapy.
Sure. Well, yeah, the first sort of step is really to get to know your client and the problem. So we might say that the chief complaint, and find out what that is in more detail,
Mm.
basically. So asking them a series of questions around when it started, what makes it better, what makes it worse, 6 or 7 kinds of questions and just kind of digging in and being like really curious and trying to be like a scientist, trying to get as much of the data as you can. And it might not make any sense. You're not ready yet to connect the dots, but you want to have as many dots as you can get from that person, because it might come back later on where you're like, oh, they said that in that first session, maybe XYZ. Or it's also really helpful to have all that information. You can use it later to motivate them and guide them. And sometimes it might feel like they're not making progress, but you have the record of where they started. So you can show them how far they've come. So there is a lot of talking in that first session. You can think of it a little bit like an interview where you're asking them a lot of questions, they're answering. Um, and you might be digging into, yeah, the injury that they have or the niggle, but also generally what their life is like what
Hmm.
their sleep is like, their stress, as like you alluded to, emotional issues that might be causing something. So just trying to get as much of the picture as you can from them. And you
And
might
I remember
spend,
thinking people would
yeah,
hate this. I remember thinking everyone's just going to want to get onto the yoga. People won't want to talk to me about their problems, but boy, was I wrong.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I'm people. People like to be heard and they want to be
yes,
understood. And I mean, the big benefit that we have to offer as yoga teachers is not our technical expertise. We're not a doctor, we're not a physical therapist, but what we can offer them is time and
yeah.
attention. We can listen and reflect back. And even if there's nothing we can do to help, for a lot of people, they just feel better after having someone take the time to listen to the whole thing, the whole story, and all of the things that they think are interlinked that other people haven't necessarily had the time to listen to.
Yeah, because I mean, you go to the doctor, it's just like a revolving door. You're just in and out.
Yeah. Through no fault
Same,
of doctors, just through the
no,
design of the medical system. Yeah.
yeah, and can often be the same with a physio as well, or at least past the first session, it's usually very quick.
Mm.
And I agree. It's like people just they just want to feel validated, and
Mhm.
often that validation can be such a exponentially set you on a healing path, for just feeling like, oh, this is real and it matters, and someone cares about what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And yeah, getting that sense of like partnership between the two of you.
And sometimes it even brings up things that they haven't connected before, like, oh, yeah, my back is always more sore after gardening. Like, why haven't I haven't actually thought that all the way through before, but yeah, often it is a little bit more sore after I've been out in the garden all day. And I mean, you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to fix anything, but just going through the story and answering questions that might seem on the surface of it unrelated, like what are my hobbies and pastimes? What tends to make it better, what tends to make it worse, can help students themselves connect dots that they hadn't seen as being joined before. So, yes, the interview process, that whole taking in information, not just about the chief complaint, but about this person and their life
Hmm.
and the point that they're at, can be really therapeutic, even if it doesn't give you a clear hypothesis as to what's going on and how you can help. It can still magically change the student's experience.
Yeah, and to reiterate, especially if this person's coming back for multiple sessions, it's just such a great way to build trust and create that relationship with the student, for them to feel like, okay, this person is so invested in
Mhm.
me and they're taking the time to get to know me and, you know, find out these things about me. So it's so crucial, and I think for the relation, it's so crucial for the relationship, but it's so crucial for you as the teacher. Again, it's what's going to give you that toolkit basically, because you have it's the brief. I call it the brief. It's like, okay, I know what I'm trying to do here, what the
Mhm.
objectives are, I have the information, and then that empowers you to feel like you can create a plan for them that's going to be based on something real. So part of that interview or part of that first session is then doing some assessments, as we mentioned,
Mhm.
having a look at their range of motion, moving, depending on what joint you're looking at, noticing, okay, well, how much can you draw your knee to your chest? How is your forward fold? And then asking them as you're doing all of these, whether how that feels and how it's going for them. because their subjective experience is also so important, not just about what you see in their body. And
Yeah,
that
and
again
again,
gives you more of those dot points.
yeah, and again, I think this is such a lovely place where not being the medical expert is actually really helpful. Where I don't need to be able to diagnose what that means or what that suggests or what that sensation is. I'm literally just there to reflect their experience back to them and to help them clarify their observations. No, it doesn't hurt when I bring the other knee to my chest, but it feels like heavier or it feels blocked or restricted. You're getting them to kind of interrogate the information that their body's giving them, and that makes them much better at communicating that to you, and then to other medical professionals as well. If they do go back to their physical therapist, they've got more concrete information to work with.
Hmm.
If they go back to their doctor, they've got more concrete information to work with. So helping people make sense of their felt experience, I think, is another really underrated aspect of this first session. I'm getting all excited
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, it's so true. Like, when do we ever get a chance to have that reflection? Like, so most of our day is like we're in our head and or in, experiencing something within ourselves, and we just have that. We analyze it, or we try to figure it out. But we so rarely have that chance to figure it out with someone else, and that reflection, and kind of then someone says it back to you, and you can kind of say, oh no, actually it's not like that, it's more like this.
Hmm.
And having that clarity is is quite freeing. And also there's something I think quite comforting about it too, to feel like maybe like you're not crazy, like it's like,
Yes,
oh yeah.
I am feeling this, and I know what I'm feeling because I've put shape and form and words and language around it now. And again, you spoke about the therapeutic benefit of just feeling seen and heard. Feeling like you've got a good handle on your experience can also
Mm,
have therapeutic benefits. Just kind of knowing what's going on as opposed to that thing in my knee or that thing in my hip, or putting language
yeah.
around it itself makes the problem feel less everything everywhere all at once. And it's just this sensation in this plane of movement, and it's this kind of sensation. It starts making it more specific, more concrete, and
Hmm.
less all pervasive. Yeah, it can have
Yeah.
really unexpected power.
Yeah. And I've had sessions, the first session with brand new clients, where they've had quite an emotional release through that process, because they've finally taken the time to do something about this niggle instead of ignoring it and putting it over there. And they've finally taken the time to say to themselves, like, oh, I matter. And I don't have to feel this way. I don't have to keep suffering. And yeah, it's so powerful, isn't it? Like that sense of just taking a stand for yourself, like real actual self-care, not
Hmm.
just the
Bubble
candlelit
baths.
bubble baths, which I love. They're great. And I wish I could do more of them. I'd do one every day if I could. But that sense of empowerment that comes from saying, like, you know what, I don't actually have to live like this
Mhm.
anymore. And here's someone who's going to help me. And I've had some really beautiful first sessions from
Mhm.
that very simple process of interview and assessment, and maybe some breathing and core work, like keeping it super simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But the fear is from anyone who's new to one on one sessions is that I'll get all of this information. I'll have a look at their range of motion. I'll get them to do a couple of poses and see that there are differences between the two sides. And I still won't have any idea what to do to help. So I'm sure that's happened for you. It's definitely happened for me before. What's your remedy to wrap up that first session with something that feels helpful and then make a plan moving forward?
Yeah. For me, my two, breath work, core work. Those are my like two that I feel like everyone could
Boring.
use more of.
Boring but accurate.
You can do it quickly, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. You can teach it easily, you can keep it simple, and it just lays the foundation. If you can
Mhm.
connect to your breath and you can strengthen, transverse abdominis in particular, that's the foundation. And we build on top of that. And I feel always like I can send people home with that homework. And, I know that the most of the time they'll do it.
Yeah.
It's easy enough to follow along. And yeah, but those are my go-tos every single time, no matter who's in front of me.
Yeah, I'm the same. I would add myofascial release as a third option.
Yeah,
Probably less powerful over the long term, but in terms of creating immediate relief that get people excited, like, oh, I did that one thing for my hip and then I could bring my knee to my chest so much more easily. Oh my God, you've changed my life. That sort of immediacy that gets them hooked, gets them,
yeah,
okay, my experience can change. And if I do this thing every day as my homework, who knows what will happen? So that's my kind of third go-to. I absolutely agree. The breath is so powerful to bring people out of the head into the body, to have that big impact on the central nervous system, to downregulate all of the other secondary things that have built up around that one primary chief complaint. I think most people feel better when they're strong, when they feel strong. So even if core work has no functional impact on their shoulder or their ankle, it still makes people feel stronger, more competent, more integrated. And that in itself can help, even if there's no really specific structural flow over. And then, yeah, I would add myofascial release as
yeah.
a way to make
I love
quick,
it.
potentially temporary changes that get people feeling like, okay, I got something really concrete out of this session. And then you
Yeah.
mentioned going away in between to research. Me too. What's your approach then?
I guess it's just about looking at everything I've written down to
Yes.
start off with, because usually in that session, uh, I'm not trying to analyze or process. I'm just asking questions. And most of the time, once someone starts talking, they just tell you a lot of stuff. So you do feel
Mhm.
like a doctor in those moments, like just scribbling
Writing
and
illegibly.
hoping you can read your handwriting afterwards. Yeah. Um, and just going by, that's the first step, is just to sit down. And often, they'll tell you things sort of out of order, or at least the order that we kind of learn within our intake process. So it's just about maybe rewriting some of it, or looking at it, reading it, and thinking about what they said, kind of pairing that up with what I know about the anatomy, or some other injuries or disorders that I've learned about. And then, of course, asking Google sometimes can be helpful, or some other great yoga medicine teachers that I know, I
Mhm.
might ask them as well, and to just get a sense of what's happening with this person, and coming up with a plan of what we would do in the second session, and knowing that it might work, it might not work, but to just keep it as, to keep open minded, in that we're also trying to see what they're going to respond to, like what's going to help them. So I don't go too crazy and become too rigid about, like, oh well, this is it and this is what we're going to do. It's
Yes.
just start to kind of outline a little bit of where we might go in the next session. What do
I
you do?
love that. Yeah, very similar, because I think you highlighted the most important thing, which is go back over the information that you already have. Because if you're really in the moment with your student and you're listening and just noting things down, there's very little space in your brain to be putting things together and developing hypotheses and making plans to move forward. You're in this really open and receptive, taking in everything phase. And yeah, by the end of practice, you want to give them something to do, whether that is breath awareness, core awareness, myofascial release, but you're not really at the point of putting a really clear picture together. And so going back to the information with fresh eyes later and just noticing, are there some repeated themes coming out that you didn't notice on the day? Or is there a question that you now think you'd really like to ask that you didn't
Mhm.
ask at the time, or a pose that you want them to do, or a myofascial release practice to check in with the state of the tissues to kind of help round out the information that you've gotten? You won't know that really until you reflect back. And I agree. I might Google if they've got a really specific diagnosis that I don't have as much familiarity with, or ask another yoga medicine teacher. But mostly for me, it's looking back over the existing information, figuring out what gaps I've got that I might want to fill in, and then just a starting strategy. And I
Yeah.
love how you said to keep that really open, because the next phase is test something out and see. helpful, not helpful? Are we continuing in that direction or are we changing
Mhm.
tack? Yeah.
And most of the time, in my experience, something stands out from that first session, like very clearly, whether it's
Hmm.
something that they said or an assessment or how they feel in a pose or a- alignment that they're unable to connect with, or, some muscle contraction that they're just not feeling that they should be feeling. Like usually something is pretty apparent and
Hmm.
obvious. And for me, that's always a great starting place. It's like, okay, well, let's go there. Let's focus on that. Um, and then finding some way to balance it all out because, we don't want to just be doing bridges for an hour, for example. They're not going to come back.
So that you've kind of suggested, and I agree that there is a difference between the stuff that you get them to do when you're together in person or virtually versus the homework that you give them in between sessions. And I think a lot of people come to this therapeutic relationship as students feeling highly motivated, like, I'll do an hour every day. I promise I really want to resolve this issue. And then, surprise, surprise, life gets in
Mhm.
the way. And, the kids get sick or they have big deadlines at work or they have family come to stay or, whatever happens, their injury flares up again and their best laid plans go awry. So I'm the same as you. There are definitely there's a larger list of things that I do with them in person, and a much much smaller list of things that I give them for homework. And for homework, I'm usually looking for that thing that stands out, as you said. What's the thing that was really different between the two sides, or difficult without being painful, that they still could wrap their head around? Because I'm trying to give them something that I think will make a difference, but also something that I know they're willing to do and that I know they'll do reasonably well. So it's that kind of Venn diagram of the thing that's
Yeah,
helpful, the thing that they like, and the thing that
I
they've
like
got
that.
a grip on how to do. Yeah.
See that in my mind. Yeah,
Yes.
and that's the thing is we want to keep empowering them and not making them feel worse. I
Hmm.
definitely fell into that trap in the beginning of being mm, manipulated into thinking that my my students would be like, no, no, I want like a practice. Give me a
Yeah.
practice. They
Hmm.
would use that word. And so it was like, it had to be longer than 5 minutes. And I was like, and I was really excited and
Hmm.
enthusiastic. And I had all these new tools and poses and ways of doing things. And I'd be like, okay. And I'd make these beautiful PDFs with the pictures and write everything out. And then
Hmm.
sure enough, they wouldn't do any of it, and because it was too hard or too overwhelming, or they
Yeah.
couldn't remember exactly how to do it right. And so
Yes.
they were afraid to do anything. So it took
Yes.
me a little while to learn that just give them one thing, keep it
Yes.
simple. Yeah.
I agree. And I mean, I have had a couple of very, very rare students who over time have built up to a program that they do on their own that is like 30 or 40 minutes. But I didn't give it to them on day one because, like you, I found that every time I did, through no fault of their own, just life intervened. And so I think starting off really humbly,
Hmm.
worst case scenario, please do this one thing every day because we know it's the little things that compound over time when you do them
Yeah.
again and again and again. And if it turns out that they're really good at doing that one thing, you could add a second thing. So maybe you're
Yeah.
doing myofascial release and breath work, or breath work and core work. And if they are really good at adhering to that, then you could add a third, but they still know this one's the top priority. If I've got time, I'll do number two. If I've got time, I'll do number three. But on the days where I've got the deadline or the kids are crazy, I'll still just do the one. I think that sets them up for much better success than,
Yeah.
yeah, of course you want a 30-minute program. Of course you do. I'll give you one. And even if you film a video for them so that they don't even have to remember how to do it, life is still going to intervene at some
Yeah.
point, isn't it? Probably.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's pretty easy. We've all done it where we've just gone turn the video off. You think you're going to get through the 30 minutes, but you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
For me, my
Yeah.
my torture is I'll notice that the windows are dirty. Me practicing at home near a window, it's just a recipe for disaster. You can't have that dirty window there.
Curtains, blinds.
Yeah, the curtains are
Surely
dirty
that's
too.
something you can do.
Curtains have dog
So
hair on them. It's a long story. It's a painful story, but that's
yeah, I
why
know,
I
I
love
get
a
it.
10-minute practice. That's why I have a 10-minute strength series on Yoga Medicine Online, because 10 minutes I can get through no matter how dirty the windows are.
Okay, good. I'm glad you figured that one out.
hmm So being
Mhm.
realistic about the homework, I think, is totally key. And say you are working with somebody, you've put a strategy into place in the second session, and then a couple of sessions in, it's not working so well anymore. How do you address that need to change tack, or they have a flare up, or, their circumstances change? What happens if you need to change your strategy partway through?
I think firstly, it's just about empathizing. If there's a flare up or it's not working, and it's just letting them know like there's a million things that we can be doing, and there's so many different ways that we can approach this.
hmm
And we do some weeks, some weeks we're really tired, and some weeks
hmm
we have a lot of energy, and some weeks we can't do anything complicated because our heads are full of all of our other, life and personal things. So I just think that's so normal. And I think for just by saying that this is normal, this
hmm
happens to all of us, myself included, whether I'm dealing with an injury or not, there's just life, and we go with the flow. I mean, that's what you have to do, and I think just being like steady and confident in your leadership in those situations, and the client follows along. I think that's what they want most of all, is to just feel like you've got this. And that's just, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. But but with time, like with experience, the more you do it, the more you go, okay, this is totally normal. Let's just dial it all back this week. Or let's, if that's feeling really painful, let's focus on a different part of the body or a different part of the hip.
Yes.
You change gears and you keep going.
And I love the fact that you used that as an example of leadership, because I think sometimes people get in their head, like if I'm confident and I'm faking it till I make it, then I'll be the one saying, well, you've just got to work this muscle that I decided was important to work. And we've just got to keep going down this track. And that's me being strong, and that's me being a leader. But again, this is another place where it's really beautiful to be not their medical professional and not their healthcare
Mhm.
provider, because they're in charge. And if their subjective experience is it's not as helpful as it was 2 weeks ago, or it's creating pain or irritation now, great. The confident leader yoga teacher says, I really appreciate that feedback. That's really helpful. I'm so glad that you noticed that. There's another, myriad ways that we could use to approach that problem. There are lots of other strategies that we can use. Let's test out a couple today. Notice what you respond to, pay attention today, also pay attention tomorrow, and let's see if we can form a new strategy together. That's real leadership, is listening to their input and their
Mhm.
feedback, valuing it, assuring them that it's normal, that things change, that progress is rarely straightforward and linear, and then being confident to try a couple of different approaches. That's the only way I think that we're going to succeed in the long run, is being flexible and listening to the students' feedback.
Yeah, and I guess maybe for me, just I was reflecting as you were talking, I've had a fair few injuries of my own. So
Yeah.
I think I'm coming from that experience of knowing, well, this has happened to me too with all of my injuries. It's never
Yeah.
just been a linear, A to Z kind of road. You're up and you're down, and
I just did
you're
a
really
social
into
media
one
post
thing.
on
You're
this recently. This is why I'm laughing, because the prime social media reel is, I did this one thing for hip pain and it disappeared. Did this one thing daily and my low back pain vanished. Maybe that happens sometimes. I'm not calling people liars, but definitely in my injury experience, it's never been just one thing. And even the one thing that really helped in the short term didn't continue to help in the long term. And often I had to change my approach or address multiple factors at once. I had to reflect the fact that some days I've got great energy, other days I haven't. Some days the pain's higher, some days the pain's lower. Usually it requires a much more nuanced and
Mhm.
responsive and conversational approach. How am I feeling? What do I need? Is that helping me today? Is that detracting from me today? So yes, anyone who tells you do this one thing daily for hip pain is at best oversimplifying, and at worst probably lying to get your money.
Yeah. Well, we're human, right? It's like we're always changing. We're not static, we're dynamic,
Yeah.
we're
Complex,
yeah, we're
layered.
complex. Yeah. And that's what's beautiful about us too. And what's great about yoga is that there's so many different modalities,
Mhm.
styles, um, and it's empowering to feel that you can change gears, and to
Yeah.
feel that you can change directions.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, to me, I think that's just the most empowering thing because often when people come to you with pain, when they're in the middle of an injury, they feel very stuck and they
Mhm.
feel like it's going to be like this forever. And to just have that reassurance that actually you're not going to be in this forever and you actually can change what it is that you're doing and we can mix things up. I feel like it, yeah, just paints a picture of there's, sunnier days are coming. Like
Mhm.
we're going to go there together. And in my experience and the clients that I've had, it's like just meeting them where they're at in that moment of just being like, yeah, this is really shitty. And I'm sorry that you feel like you're going backwards and you're not progressing in the way that you wanted to, but it's normal. It's okay. We're going to figure this out together.
Yes, 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 yes. And this is another place where your notes from that initial interview can be so helpful because we all live in the moment. And especially if you're dealing with pain or irritation or a niggle of some kind, you can forget how bad it was when it's not 100%. It's still in your mind, this thing, this injury. And you being able to reflect back and say, I know you're having an irritated day today. I know you're having a flare up today, but you still rating it a 5 out of 10. And when we first met, it was an 8 out of 10. So this is not back to rock bottom. You're not back to day one. You're not starting from scratch. You just take a couple of steps forward, a little step back, a couple of steps forward, a little step back. You're still on the pathway to recovery. We'll change tack today, but this is not you starting back at ground zero again. This is just part of the healing process. This is how it is. This is normal and it's
Yeah.
okay. We've got other tools in our toolkit. Yes.
And it
Love
is
all of that.
it is often true that where they won't rate the pain as high as when they first started,
Yeah.
which is just the best, isn't it, to be able to reflect that back to them.
Totally. And even if they don't, even if it's like today it's an 8, but do you know what? Yesterday it was only a 6. So, maybe tomorrow it won't be. And over time with your relationship with each student, the more experience they have of pain being changeable and variable, the more
Yes.
reassured they are. Like, yeah, it's a flare up today, but I had this a month ago and it went away within a couple of days. So I'm taking it easy. I'm backing off whatever it was that made it irritated. I'm going back to my breath work and I'm pretty confident that it'll be back to where it was yesterday, tomorrow. That feeling of impermanence and changeability gets easier and easier to communicate the more the student has felt it in their own body.
Yeah, I love that what you just said about pain is changeable,
Yeah.
which just, yeah, summarizes what I was saying before. It's just so simple and clear. It's like if you can give them that experience, then you can change tactics. It's like, okay, well, it's like this almost to me, it's like this opposite sides of the same coin.
Mm.
That sense of like, okay, on this side, the pain is changing, it gets better and worse. And on this side, we can change what we do to help what you're feeling and experiencing.
Yes. Like I can't do any of the side plank things, but do you remember on day one, we did that breath work and your pain reduced from an 8 to a 6? We can go back to breath work again and there's no irritation and you're still feeling better. So we've got lots of options. We don't have to only do the side plank thing to
Yeah.
improve yeah, I love that. I think that's really helpful. You've probably had, because I definitely have had the experience where sometimes no matter how many times you change tack, the situation's not improving or you've reached the limit of where you feel you can be helpful. Have you had that scenario come up with people? And if so, how did you handle it?
It depends a little bit on the context. Like
Yeah.
I worked for a while doing one-on-ones at a rehab center, so that's where I would usually come across it the most. It was just that
Mhm.
like our time was up and that person was leaving, and that was always quite frustrating for me, but and also for them to just feel like, okay, well, we're getting somewhere, but now we're done. And you
Mm.
just really, hope that they can find someone that can continue on with them. And I would give lots of suggestions, like try this person or this person wherever you're going
Yes.
back to.
Yes.
But in terms of sort of more what you're asking, sometimes it's about finding other practitioners, that can help. Maybe they need a deep tissue release. Maybe they need an adjustment. Maybe another doctor that needs with a different opinion. So having that in your toolkit as well to be able to suggest and refer them out to other people.
Yeah. Totally agree.
And
Especially if you can send them armed with really specific information. Like you had
yeah,
this sharp pain at your hip crease when you brought your knee toward your chest and it got better for a while. These were the practices that made it better. And now it's not getting better anymore. Now we do those practices and it's not getting better. And you're feeling it in this pose and this pose, or you're feeling it when you bend down to put your shoes or your socks on or to pick something up off the floor. Maybe it's time to go back to your doctor or your physical therapist again, but you're sending them back with, it's this specific place, it's this specific sensation, it's in this movement or position. You're sending them back with, and it was getting better for a little while and now it's not. You're sending them back with a much clearer and more concrete picture for their healthcare practitioner to work with, whoever that is.
Yeah.
And that in itself is helpful.
Yeah, and the things that we did that helped and things that we didn't do that helped. And I mean, I don't know, I think, we don't come into this trying to fix everyone or anyone, I should say. And sometimes maybe there are things that we can't completely help them with. And on some level, we have to accept that that's going to show up at times. It doesn't mean that we were unhelpful. If we were able to get their pain from a 10 to a 4, that's huge. That's a massive increase in quality of life and how someone lives day to day, or if we're able to help them sleep a little bit better, but they still have that little niggle. Like, I think you also have to, this is where the intake is so powerful, because you can see how far you've come, and you have to also be grateful for the things that we were able to change, that we were able to help them with. And sometimes I think it's just like teaching group classes, where at some point you have to go, well, I'm no longer the teacher for you. And here's some other people that might be able to help you. And that's a conversation you have to have with them as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've had that come up as well, where it's less, we work together really well, the approach is really helpful, but I've hit the limit of what I can help you with, and now you've got to go back to somebody else for deep tissue or for physical therapy or for a doctor to get a clearer diagnosis. And then the other flip side of it is, I'm just not the right teacher for you. I've definitely had those scenarios too, where over time, it's become clear that what the student wants is not something I'm interested in providing. And I think it is really powerful to be able to have the conversation to say, I get the feeling that what you're needing is X, and I'm not the right teacher for that. That's not my area of expertise, or that's not my scope of practice, or that's not my area of passion or interest, but I can refer you on to being ready to refer them on to somebody else. That in itself, I think, is a really good sign of somebody who is confident in their teaching, as opposed to feeling desperately like I've got to change myself, or they're wrong for wanting something different from what I offer. Just to accept that people can be in different places and need different things. Yeah.
And sometimes it comes down to personality as well. Like, it's
Yes.
just not that fit.
Chemistry.
And if you're going to be spending, if you're going to be seeing someone weekly or every other week for a year, like, that's a lot of time to spend with someone that, if you don't really have that chemistry, your work together is not going to be that effective, because it's just, both people are going to feel it really at the end of the day, or in the session. And at the end of the day, I think if you bring that energy into the session with you, what's the point? I just feel like, there's a lot more to it. That trust and that empathy and the relationship is a huge part of this. That's maybe harder to quantify or to measure. But if that really great basis for the relationship isn't there, for me, I'd rather, find someone else for that person to work with.
I agree. And that does require trust. You said that, and that's such a powerful word. It requires trust from you that this is not your only possible client, that there are other people out there that you will be able to be helpful for and that you will have really good chemistry with. And it also requires trust that this person will get what they need from somewhere else, if not the first person you refer them to, then wherever they end up. That you've got to hold the whole process in a looser grip than it has to be me. It has to be the suggestion that I've provided. This is my only opportunity. You've really got to create space around those sorts of beliefs and trust that they will find the right person and you will find the right people and it will all be okay. And that takes a bit of maturity.
Yes. And it's hard. Like, if people aren't knocking down your door to have private sessions with you and this is what you want to be doing, it can be really hard to let go of that client. But I really do believe that that fit and that chemistry is so important because it's the foundation for you being effective. And
yes,
that's where we started this conversation, is like part of the reason you would do a one-on-one in this type of way, a more therapeutic approach, is to be effective, is to create some change for this person. So
yeah, I mean, that's the single reason that I love doing therapeutic one-on-ones as opposed to teaching a class to one person, is I have a chance to actually make a difference, to provide targeted tools to this individual that meet what they need. And seeing that change their experience of being in their body over time is for me, the most satisfying thing. And I think you've brought us to a really beautiful finishing point, which is, if we're talking to somebody who wants to do therapeutic one-on-ones with somebody, for me, the most effective way I have ever gotten them is from word of mouth. And you won't get positive word of mouth if you're trying to hold on to an unhelpful relationship with someone. You've got to free your time up so that you've got the time to work with people that you are really going to be helpful for and that you are going to be a good fit with. So how would you suggest people get started on that whole process of finding one-on-one students to work with?
I mean, I think social media is a great place to get to really, that's what I did, to just put it out there. Like, I think, first of all, people need to know that this is what you do. And if you're not telling people that this is what you do, then there's no way for them to know that you can help them. So I
Yeah.
think that's first and foremost, is being really clear on, I'm a therapeutic yoga teacher. I teach private sessions one-on-one. These are the kinds of things that I can help you with. And, putting maybe even a call out on social media, like, I'm looking for 2 people with back pain, or I'm looking for 2 people with shoulder pain, and getting started that way. And obviously you might be wanting to find more people than that, but just starting
Start.
small, just start, get those people. And um, you might have a website, you might not, you might just do it all on social media. You could even go and talk to physios, chiropractors, doctors in your area to let them know that that's what you do, because those people are always looking for yoga teachers to recommend. They are seeing their patients in the acute phase of something, but then eventually they need to move on from that, but they still need help with whatever they're dealing with. So I've gotten a few clients that way when I was first getting started. And then, yeah, as you said, those did end up, actually had one client that she was seeing a psychologist because of how much pain she was in. She was also seeing a psychologist for the emotional side of what she was going through. And because our sessions were so effective, her psychologist then wanted my details so she could refer, more of her clients to me. So I think it's, creating that network as well. It
Yes.
can be
Yeah, that's the medium
really
to
important.
long-term solution that I would totally recommend. I think in the short term, you've just got to start. So whether you start as you did with case studies, you've done a training, you've got all of this great theoretical information, you want to try it out on some real life people and see what works, what doesn't, how do they respond, refine your language, refine your prop use and your options. How do you dial up the intensity? How do you dial down the intensity? All of the questions that come up when you start to put the theory into practice. So just get started somehow. Maybe that is case studies. Maybe that is putting out a call on social media. And I loved how specific yours was. I'm specifically looking people for shoulder pain or low back pain. I'm looking for 2 people, making it feel specific enough to kind of grab people's attention. One way or another, just get started, because without the experience, you don't build that skill set. And without that experience, you don't generate the medium to long-term solution, which is word of mouth. Word of mouth from existing clients, referring their friends, their family, their colleagues, and finding that network of similarly minded professionals that trust you not to overstep your boundaries, not to step outside your scope and say, oh, you can come off your meds. Breath work will solve your depression. Having people that they trust to refer to, where they know that you're going to do things that are safe. They know that you'll come back to them if you have questions or concerns. Those relationships over the medium to long term can be so powerful, because people are complex and layered, and yoga is unlikely to be the one thing that fixes their back pain. It might be a conjunction of manual therapies, physical therapy, occupational therapy, talk therapy, yoga therapy. You want to be able to have professionals in all of those fields to come together and help people. So yeah, I love that. I love that you've given an immediate suggestion of how to start. And then as you get started, some ways to really build your reputation in your community or in your field of expertise. Love it.
Amazing.
I feel like we've come to a really natural finishing point. Any last bits of advice that you would give people, or resources that you'd send them to?
Yeah, I think, as we've already said, but to just stress that you don't need to have all the answers.
Yes.
And to just let it be conversational. You can answer questions with questions. If someone asks you something and be like, oh, that's interesting. So when do you feel that? And to just keep getting all those dot points, keep just asking how they're doing. How does that feel? What happens when you do this? What happens when we do this? And let the whole session have that tone, so that you don't need to have the answers, and that you can go later on and find the answers if you even need them at all. I think it's just the biggest tip that I probably would have given myself when I was trying to get started and was just so afraid to.
Yes.
That's what I would tell myself.
I second, third, and fourth that. And again, I think that's one of the most powerful things of inhabiting this space as a yoga teacher is we don't need to have the answers, because we can't diagnose, we can't treat. That's outside our scope of practice. What we can do is really engage the student in the experience, ask them a bunch of questions, gather information, clarify, help them clarify so that they are clearer on what they're feeling and what they're experiencing and which things tend to help and which things don't, whether they end up getting solutions from working with us or taking that information back to somebody else. Don't underestimate the power that process can have.
Well said.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Get out there and do it, people. So I will link to some resources. You did a great social media post on that first intake, that first interview. I'll link to that. I might also link to mine on this one thing to fix your hip pain. And there's also a great course on the Yoga Medicine Forum on that full therapeutic assessment, that intake process, that I'll link to for people who are interested in what that looks like at Yoga Medicine. I feel like that should get you started. Yeah,
the red flags course as well.
So that's just things to be aware of, where the student might volunteer information that would plant a flag in the back of your mind of, I need to refer them to see a medical professional sooner rather than later. I want to send them off to get some expert care pretty quickly, so that you can feel confident sitting back and being a listener, knowing if something really significant comes up, you're going to recognize it and be able to highlight, without scaring them, that it might be something they want to address with their healthcare professionals. I love that. We'll link to all of those resources. Get out there and start if you haven't started, and let us know what challenges came up for you. What did you enjoy? How did the experience work? What did you learn? All the good things.
Amazing. Yeah.
And
Thanks,
if people
Rachel.
want to know more about you, Dana, where would we send them?
Social media, Dana D Yoga is a good place to find me and connect.
Brilliant. We'll link to that too. Thank you so much for your time. This was a fun one.
Thanks, Rachel. I enjoyed it too. See ya.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine.
If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.